once you start putting your kit together, you're going to notice that when you put parts together sometimes, you'll end up with a little bit of a gap. And when you look at a model that's done and finished and painted, if there's a lot of big seam lines and gaps where the parts meet, it doesn't look real. It looks like a plastic model sitting on the shelf. So what you want to consider is using a filler putty to fill in some of the seam lines that show up on a model. So I have 3 different types of putty here. I have Tamiya putty, which is my putty of choice. I use this all the time. I have Vallejo, which is a really nice acrylic-based putty. This is good stuff also. And I have good old Squadron green stuff. This is actually white putty. The original was green. So, like I say, I like to use the Tamiya putty. So I've got this Hawker Hurricane model, and I noticed on the top where the 2 halves, and usually it's where 2 parts meet, on the top of this there's a big seam line running down. So if I use liquid cement and I squeeze it together, that'll fill it to an extent, but if there's any remaining lines, what I do is I take a little bit of my putty, and I like to take some out of the tube. I don't just take the tube and squirt it on the model. I like to take a little bit of this putty and put it out on the card, a little plastic card, or you can use cardboard. I like plastic because then the putty does not seep down into it, and it retains its fluidity. And what I'll do is I'll take an old X-Acto knife with an old blade, and I'll just take some of this putty on my blade. I try and get it right on the edge, and I'll just walk down this seam line right here on the front, and I'll just put a little bit of putty on the seam line. And I'll just keep working that, just taking a little bit at a time, and just work it down. And you'll know, when you start doing this, you'll feel where the seam line is, and you just work your putty down. So I'll putty this seam line wherever I see a gap, let it dry, and then I'll take my sandpaper, my file, or my sanding stick, and I'll just take it and I'll rub it over that. But you got to wait until it's nice and dry. You put your putty on, let it sit for a few hours, maybe half the day, and then come back and just sand down that seam line. And when you're all done and you've filled all your seam lines and you prime it with some gray paint, you'll see how good of a job you did. And if there's any other gaps still remaining, you put a little more putty on it, prime it. Thanks for checking us out today, and make sure you come to our website, www.megahobby.com, for all your hobby needs.